Hi guys, so I'm going to be going away for a while, just for our little vacation. I think every one of us owes ourselves a little bit of some vacation. So the thing is I wanted to make some vlog videos in the meantime. And I really thought about it. What's a topic that I rarely ever talk about on my show that deals with animation? How about my favorite animated movies of all time? Yeah. Ever since I've started this review series, everybody's been asking me, what are my favorite animated movies of all time? And honestly, I just didn't know what to say or how to approach that because I gain more experience every time I watch movies. So, even when I started my review series, I was 19 years old, so there were clearly a lot more movies that I could have watched in that time. So it's always been a topic that I've been thinking about since I started this review series, like, what is a whole countdown of my favorite animated movies of all time? And I feel like I've owed myself just enough time to list off my top 20 favorite animated movies of all time. However, as opposed to doing it in one video, I thought about doing it in a series of 4 videos. I almost forgot how to count for a second. But yeah, the first video will be the top 20, going on to 15, going on to 10, then to the top 5. So, by the time all these videos get finished, you can start going backwards. Start from the top 5, go all the way back to the top 20. But for now, I figured I'd go from 20 to 16, and then the next video I go from 16 to 15. You get the deal. Anyways, so there were some things I thought about when making this list. Obviously, I didn't include films that just came out this year, so the most recent films you're going to see are actually from 2014. So it gives me a little bit more time to evaluate which ones are my favorite and which ones aren't. You're going to see some selections that might annoy you, whereas it's like, why didn't you go with those other films? Like, for example, I didn't include Fantasia in my list, mainly because as far as like animated films go, it really set the bar in a way that makes it hard to compare to other movies. You're going to see some other films that aren't going to show up in this list that might annoy you, but you know what? It's my list, so I hopefully give enough reason as to why I enjoy these movies so much, but you know what? You can't please everybody. So, let's get started with number 20. Number 20 is Ice Age. Now, surprisingly, a lot of people will get annoyed for the fact that I included a Blue Sky film. But honestly, I've always loved Blue Sky Animation. I always felt like they were the best animation studio on the East Coast making feature films, if not the only one. And they're comparable to Pixar and DreamWorks. As far as their animated films go, I always felt that they were on par with those films and able to take cartoon characters from pencil and translate them to fully three-dimensional computer animated characters, which is no easy task, mind you. And the funny thing about the first Ice Age film is that they didn't really focus a lot on rendering as much on structure, and I really felt like they accomplished some really good structure in these characters that made them really appealing cartoon characters. Also, on another tangent, a lot of people don't like this movie because they felt it was a knockoff of Shrek. And while there are certain things in the movie that do resemble to the movie Shrek, and just the general trend of best friends in Pixar movies, I never viewed this movie as a knockoff. I always viewed it as its own original piece. And in some ways, it does have a strong story. It has some compelling characters and a compelling story about, you know, 3 people that shouldn't get together and suddenly have to stick together and become a pack. I don't know. I really love this film. Number 19 is Corpse Bride. Surprisingly, this is my favorite Tim Burton produced animated film, which I'll get into, whereas we all know Nightmare Before Christmas is not directed by Tim Burton. It's produced by him, and it was directed by Henry Selick, which is also a good movie, but I have some problems with it, so I actually didn't include it on this list. And I might talk about it in a future video. But the thing is, I always viewed Corpse Bride as the superior movie, both in its animation and in its story. I do like the characters. I always felt Emily was a great, probably if not one of the best Helena Bonham Carter characters you can think of. Also, on another note, it takes something that most animated films don't deal with, whereas if you're stuck in a situation that you're kind of forced into, for example, an arranged marriage, there can be good things to come out of it, which I found to be an interesting thing to focus on, because in our Western culture, we always focus on arranged marriages to be this primitive, ancient form that should be, abolished and whatnot. Whereas in this film, it shows a different take on it. And in some ways, it sticks to that theme and goes all the way with it. And to me, that consistency works. Also, this is the first time we ever get to see Leica Animation really show off their chops. And as far as the animation goes, it's really well done. I mean, I always loved the aesthetic of a Tim Burton character. And to me, a lot of his tropes that work in live action really work in animation. And to me, this works out a little bit better than Frankenweenie. And to me, somewhat better to Nightmare Before Christmas. Number 18 is Heavy Traffic. I obviously had to choose one Ralph Bakshi movie of all of his films. And honestly, Ralph Bakshi is one of those filmmakers that might turn you off. And I wouldn't blame you, but you have to acknowledge or at least appreciate what he did for the medium, especially in America. And to me, the one movie that's most consistent is Heavy Traffic. And honestly, it takes things that you wonder should not be done in animation. And to me, you can obviously do things. And this is a problem with filmmakers today, is that they take something and they're like, oh, I'll just make an animated movie about it. Whereas I feel like you can animate it, doesn't mean that you should. Whereas in this film, you take something that could have been done in live action, but for some reason actually works out better in animation. And there's going to be a lot of gratuity in it. There is a lot of gratuity in it. So if you're not into that sort of thing, that's Busky for you. So you're probably not going to want to watch it. But for me, of all the films, if you want to claim yourself to be an animation nut, most likely watch Heavy Traffic as a good introduction to Ralph Bakshi. And then number 17 is going to be the movie Shrek. Obviously, when I mentioned Ice Age, you had to mention Shrek. And a lot of the things that Shrek did really well, I think, still hold up today. It's very consistent, and it's one of those, I don't want to say parody films, or at least a knock on Disney that's very consistent. Whereas at the same time, it takes the tropes that Disney uses and utilizes it in a different way. And of all the Shrek movies that have come out, I feel like this one's the most quotable. Yeah. I love that boulder. That's a nice boulder. Anyways, one of my favorite, very quotable, and overall best in story. I don't know, I really love the way the characters interact in this film. And I watch it again, and a lot of that subversive humor that worked back then, I get even more today, and I just appreciate it on that level. I talked about this movie a little already, so there's no point in me going into too much detail about it. But the point is, Shrek is possibly the best movie that established what DreamWorks was going to do. And while I think DreamWorks is, I make a lot of knocks at DreamWorks, Shrek still remains one of my favorite animated films. Number 16 goes to Tangled. Obviously, when you just go from talking about Shrek, you can go back to talking about Disney. And to me, Tangled was a great return for Disney and the Disney style. And it really jumpstarted this successful trend of Disney animated films. I find this film to be better than Frozen, and I find this film to be better than Wreck-It Ralph. Kind of a controversial thing to say, but honestly, everything that this movie does right is followed in those movies. And honestly, there's a lot of great animation in it. I love the characters and I love the story. I love how they incorporated this flower into the story that gives reason for there to be songs and gives reason for there to be some magical element in the film. Also, honestly, the animation is done by Glenn Keane, or at least supervised by Glenn Keane. He was originally going to direct the film, but then ended up dropping down to supervising animator. And you can see a lot of that influence is still there. The character of Rapunzel looks a lot like Ariel, which, come to think about it, I find it funny that the movie is, the princess character is supervised by Glenn Keane, and it has a lot of things that resemble The Little Mermaid, and The Little Mermaid jumpstarts this successful trend of Disney animated movies. After Little Mermaid, you get Beauty and the Beast and Lion King and Aladdin. And now we got the same thing going on, I'd say 20 years later, with Tangled. So that is the top 20 to 16. The next video is going to be the top 15. If you liked what you've seen, you can subscribe to this channel. And if you hope to see more, comment below and share it and all that fun stuff.